The boarding house on Candle Row had 4 rooms. Aldrich Bren had lived in the lowest one for 11 years and had met perhaps 2 of the other tenants in all that time. He liked it that way, like the narrow stair, the smell of old timber, the way his window caught the last of the evening light before it fell behind the ridge. He was a night watch keeper for the town of Keswick Ford, which meant he slept through the morning bustle and woke into the quiet of mid-afternoon, and most days the world left him alone quite happily, and he returned the favor. He was not an unhappy man. He would have told you that plainly. He had a good coat, a good lantern, a good pot of porridge he made himself each evening before his shift, and a comfortable chair by the window where he read until the light failed. He had the watch bell on the south tower, which he rang at every hour from dusk to dawn. He had the town, sleeping and trusting in his care. He had everything he needed, and he had learned a long time ago not to look too hard at what he didn't have. The room above him had been empty for 3 months when the new tenant arrived. He heard her before he saw her. A series of heavy, deliberate steps on the stair, not careless, nothing clattering, just solid and unhurried, the tread of someone carrying a great deal of weight with perfect ease. Then a long silence. Then once, a single low sound through the ceiling that he couldn't name, not quite a word, not quite a song. Something between the two, half finished. He went to bed. He met her on the 3rd day, on the landing by accident. Aldrich was carrying a bundle of tallow candles up from the landlord's storage. She was coming down the stair. The landing between them was not wide. He had heard, of course, that an orc had taken the upper room. Keswick Ford was a small town, people talked. He had heard the word mason and the word contract and the phrase for the town hall work, but he had not put any of it together with any human face, because he had not needed to, because none of it was his business. She stopped on the stair. He stopped on the landing. There was a moment. She was tall. He had not quite accounted for how tall. Her head nearly brushed the low beam above the landing, and she had tilted it slightly, not to duck it exactly, but in the easy, practiced way of someone who had learned years ago where every beam sat. Her skin was deep green, darker at the jaw, lighter along the high planes of her cheeks. Her hair was braided back tightly, bound with a strip of leather cord. She wore a mason's canvas work shirt, the sleeves rolled to the elbow, and heavy-duty trousers with tulle loops at each leg. Her hands, resting loosely at her sides, not threatening, just present, were remarkable. The knuckles were broad and calloused and certain. The hands of someone who had spent a lifetime asking stone to do things stone didn't particularly want to do and winning. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Candle Row," he said, because he had to say something, and gestured vaguely at the candles. She tilted her head a fraction. Good name for it. Then she went down the stair, and he went up, and that was the whole of it. He thought about it more than he expected to over the next few days. Not about her, exactly. He was not in the habit of thinking about people, but about the quality of stillness she had on that landing. She had not flinched. She had not looked through him, the way strangers sometimes did in a narrow space, treating another person as furniture. She had simply looked at him and waited and answered. As though a man standing with a bundle of candles in a cramped stairwell was a perfectly ordinary thing, worth a perfectly ordinary response. He supposed it was. The food appeared on a Tuesday. He came back from his morning walk, the one he always took at sunrise after the last bell before he slept, and there was a small clay pot on his windowsill. It had no lid. Inside, a thick grain porridge, still warm, threaded with dried berries and a spoonful of dark honey. There was no note. He stood in the street and looked up at the first-floor window. His window was on the ground floor. Hers was directly above it. Her shutters were closed. He looked at the pot. He looked at the window. He picked up the pot and went inside and ate the porridge standing at his own hearth, because he had not made breakfast yet, and it was very good porridge. And then he felt somewhat guilty about it, because he did not know who had left it or why. He decided it was probably a mistake. Someone meant for it to go to a different window. He left a copper penny in the empty pot on the sill before he went to sleep. The next morning there was new porridge in the pot, and the penny was gone, not taken exactly. It had simply been moved to the sill beside the pot, set carefully on its edge like a small round door left open. The third morning, the pot held a wedge of bread and a small jar of butter with dried herbs pressed into the top. The penny he had left was back on his windowsill, standing upright again. He looked at it for a long time. He left 2 pennies this time, just to be clear. The following morning, both pennies were on the sill, and there was a bowl of barley soup. He understood then that the food was not a mistake. He did not understand much else. He did not, for instance, understand why an orc woman he had spoken 11 words to would be making him breakfast every morning before he came home from the watch. He did not understand why she kept returning his coins. He understood only that the soup was very good, and that someone had gone to some trouble on his account, and that he did not know how to address this without making things strange on the narrow stair. He decided to leave a jar of apple preserves on the sill and see what happened. What happened was that the jar disappeared, and the next morning there was warm flatbread. This went on for 3 weeks. He began to notice things. The food was always there at sunrise, so she was up before first light, or perhaps she had not slept at all. It was always warm or close to it. The pot, he realized, was a good one, thick-walled and slow to lose heat. The portions were generous but not excessive, calibrated somehow to exactly how hungry a man coming off a night watch tended to be. She had noticed. He didn't know when she had noticed. He wasn't sure how. He found himself paying attention to the ceiling of his room in a way he never had before. The sounds above him, measured movement early in the evening, tools set down carefully on a work table. Once, very faintly, that half-finished sound again, the low thing between a word and a song. He could not tell if she knew he could hear it. He thought perhaps she didn't care. He brought up the subject with his friend Tobias exactly once. Tobias kept the evening shift at the north gate, and they shared an occasional pipe on the low wall by the south fountain, and Tobias was the only person in Keswick Ford Aldrich could be said to know well enough to say anything personal to. "There's someone leaving food on my windowsill," Aldrich said. Tobias looked at him. "Who?" "The mason, the new one upstairs." Tobias was quiet for a moment. He was a thoughtful man. "Have you asked her why?" "No." "Why not?" Aldrich thought about it. He watched the fountain. "I don't want to be rude about it," he said finally. Tobias looked at the pipe in his hand. "I think," he said carefully, "that asking someone why they've been feeding you for 3 weeks is not rude. I think that might actually be the opposite of rude. I don't want to make it strange on the stair." Tobias stared at him. "Aldrich." "What?" "She is leaving you breakfast every morning." "I know. That's not a small thing." "I know that too." "And you haven't said a word to her." Aldrich knocked out his pipe on the wall. "I've waved at her window twice," he said, with what he felt was some dignity. "Once she was there, and I think she waved back, but it was hard to tell because the glass is old." He could feel Tobias deciding not to say several things at once. He went home and lit his lantern and sat in his chair, and did not look at the ceiling more than once or twice. The first hard frost came down from the ridge on a Thursday, the kind that comes fast and mean in the valley, turning the lane to iron overnight and sheeting the stone steps of every doorway with a thin, invisible glaze. Aldrich came home at dawn and nearly went down on the bottom step. He caught himself on the railing, barely, and stood in the lane taking stock of his dignity. He looked up at the boarding house. The outer stairs, the ones on the north side, would be worse. That was the shade side. Sun never touched the north wall until noon at the earliest, and on a frost like this, noon might not be enough. He went around to the landlord's storage shed and found the bag of road salt. He carried it up to Mora's stair, the back stair, the one that served the upper room, and spent 20 minutes scattering it carefully over every step. He did not do it in a way that announced itself. He did the thing and went in through the side door and up to his own room and went to sleep. He did not think about it again. When he woke at mid-afternoon, there was a note slipped under his door. It was written on the back of what looked like a drafting page. The other side had faint lines and measurements on it, the geometry of a building not yet built. The handwriting on the blank side was compact and unhurried. "Thank you for the salt. I didn't think to look for that. There is stew on the hob if you want it. The door is open." He held the note for a while. She had never left a note before. "The door is open asterisk was a thing you said to someone you intended to actually see. It was not the same as food left on a windowsill before the house woke up." He understood the difference. He thought about it for nearly an hour, which he recognized as too long to think about a bowl of stew, and then he put on his jacket and went upstairs. Her room was larger than his, and organized with the kind of precision that comes not from fussiness but from work, from knowing exactly what you need and where it needs to be. The tools were ranked along the window ledge: chisels of 4 sizes, a mallet with a worn handle, a set of marking pins in a leather roll. On the work table, a drawing in progress, the front elevation of a building he recognized. The town hall. He had seen the plans briefly at the committee meeting 6 weeks back, though he had not known the mason's name then. Not yet. The committee secretary had handled the contract, and the hire had gone through without his seeing more than a signature and a guild seal. She was at the hob stirring. "Sit," she said, without looking up. He sat. The chair at her table was a solid one, heavier than his own. He noticed there were 2 chairs. He was not sure whether they had always been 2 chairs or whether she had acquired a second one at some point, but either way, there were 2. She set a bowl down in front of him. The stew was dark and thick, with root vegetables and dried meat and something aromatic he couldn't name. She sat across from him with her own bowl and picked up her spoon. He picked up his spoon. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Not an uncomfortable silence, the other kind. The kind where no one is deciding what to say next because the thing in front of them is sufficient. "You've been leaving food on my windowsill," he said. She looked up from her bowl. "I have. For about 3 weeks. Closer to 4. He nodded. He ate another spoonful of stew. "Why?" he said. She was quiet long enough that he thought perhaps he had made it strange on the stair after all. But then she said, "You light your lantern at the same time every night. Then you go out on your watch. You come back just after sunrise, and then your window goes dark. Every morning I was up before light getting ready for the site, and I saw when your window didn't go dark nights when the watch was long or when something kept you out. It's a small thing to have warm food when you come in on those mornings." He looked at her. She was looking at her bowl. "You watched my window," he said. "I watched the lane," she said carefully. "Your window was in the lane." He let that stand. He ate the stew. It was very good stew. After a moment he said, "I left coins." "I know. You kept putting them back." "I know. I wasn't sure if that was, if you wanted me to stop leaving them, or—" "I didn't want payment," she said. "It wasn't a transaction. I was just—" She stopped, stirred her bowl. "It seemed like the right thing. You do your watch and everything is quiet. I thought someone ought to make sure you had breakfast." There was a long pause. "I'm not sure anyone has thought that before," he said. She looked up at him then. The evening light coming through her window was the same yellow amber as the light from his own lantern, and it caught the planes of her face and the dark green of her skin and the quiet in her eyes. "That seems like a shame," she said. He agreed that it did. He stayed for another hour. They talked in the way that people talk who are not in the habit of talking but find, unexpectedly, that they have things to say. He told her about the watch bell and the way the sound traveled down the valley on still nights, how on a clear frost he could hear it echo off the ridge a full second after he rang it, like an answer. She told him about stone, not about the work of it exactly, but about the nature of it, the way different rock held different temperatures, the way limestone could be coaxed while granite simply refused until you found the angle it wanted. She said that most people thought stone was stubborn, but that really it was just particular. It wants to be understood before it moves, she said. Same as most things. He laughed at that, a quiet one, not much but genuine. When he stood to go, she did not make it a ceremony. She cleared the bowls and set them by the washing basin, and he put his chair back to where it had been, and they both went to the door. At the top of the stair, she said, "If the frost holds, I'll do the front steps as well." He said, "I'll bring more salt." She said, "Then I'll put the pot on." And that was how it became a thing. Not a large thing at first. Occasional. The pot on the hob, the door open. He would come up twice a week, sometimes 3 times, always in that window of late afternoon before his shift when the light was long and the house was quiet. She was usually at the drafting table when he arrived, and he would sit in the second chair and read. He had taken to bringing his book, and she would work, and the quiet between them was the same quality as that first evening, which is to say it was not empty. He told her about Keswick Ford. She was new to the town, and her knowledge of it was the contractor's knowledge, the committee, the site, the supplier for the dressed limestone, and it did not include the things he knew. Which well ran cold in August, which lane got waterlogged in spring, where the baker started first and where the fish came from on market days. She listened to all of it with attention that was not polite attention, not the kind where someone waits for you to finish, but actual attention, the kind that asks the next question because it wants to know. She told him about her work. The town hall commission was the largest she had taken outside her home region, which was far to the east, 3 weeks' journey in good weather. The guild had recommended her. The committee had hired her on that recommendation. She had a crew of 4, locals she had assessed and taken on, and they were learning quickly. She showed him the drawings sometimes. He was not an architect, not by any measure, but he could read a plan. A night watch keeper learned to know a town's layout in his bones, and he found the drawings beautiful, the clean logic of them. "You've made the entrance wider," he said once, tracing a finger just above the paper, not touching. "The original spec had it narrower." She nodded. The committee submitted the spec in spring. By winter they had approved a larger council chamber. A wider door follows from that, the space needed to breathe. The committee didn't catch that. She looked at him. There was something in her expression that was not quite a smile but was in that direction. "The committee is thorough in many ways," she said. "They do not always read drawings." He thought of the meetings he had sat through. He conceded the point. The second hard storm came on the first of deep winter, the kind the old-timers in Keswick Ford called a ridge storm. It came down from the high pass and hit the valley broadside, piling snow against the north walls of every building in town, and driving ice under the eaves, and turning the lane outside the boarding house into something that moved on its own. Aldrich was caught at the south gate when it broke, helping Tobias secure the gate's upper bolt, and by the time he made it back to Candle Row the lane was knee-deep, and his coat was soaked through the back. He came in through the side door and stood in the entrance shaking ice off his sleeves and hearing, from above him, sounds of organized urgency, boots, tools, the drag of something heavy. He went upstairs. She had moved her drafting table away from the north window because the shutter on that window had blown its hasp and was banging against the frame. The drawing pin to the table was weighted down with a chisel. She was standing on the work stool. She had no other way to reach the hinge, using a screwdriver from her tool roll. The shutter banged again. A gust of snow came in around the edge and scattered across her pinned drawing. "Let me hold it," Aldrich said. She stepped down from the stool. He got up on it. She steadied it with one hand without being asked, the grip automatic and certain, and he held the shutter flat against the frame while she replaced the hasp with a heavier one from the bottom of her tool roll, moving with the calm precision of someone who had fixed broken things in bad conditions before. It took 4 minutes. When the shutter was secured, she dusted snow off the drawing with her sleeve and inspected it. He stepped down from the stool. They stood for a moment in the room, which was warm and well lit and now quiet. The storm pushed back behind the new hasp, and Aldrich realized his coat was still dripping. "Take it off," she said. "It'll be an hour drying at least." He took off his coat. She hung it on the hook by the door. Her own coat was on the other hook, and set the kettle on. He sat in his chair and put his hands around the warm mug she gave him when it was ready, and they listened to the storm outside, and neither of them said anything for a while because there was nothing that needed saying. "You came up to help me fix the shutter," she said eventually. "I heard the banging. It would have held until morning." "Probably," he agreed. She looked at him. He looked at the kettle. He was aware that he was sitting in her room in his damp shirt with his coat drying on her door hook, and that this was not a thing he had planned. He was also aware that it felt entirely natural, which was its own kind of surprise. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "Why do you live alone?" He thought about it. He was an honest man. He disliked easy answers. "It became a habit," he said finally. "I was solitary by nature to start with, and then the work suited it. The night shift doesn't lend itself to keeping company. And then habit became just the shape of things." He turned his mug. "I don't think I noticed how long it had been, is the truth." She nodded. She was looking at the window, the firelight reflected in the glass. "I know something about that," she said. "Where was your last posting?" "A city called Vethrun, 3 years there. Good work, fair pay. No one to talk to in the evenings." "Why not?" She was quiet for a moment. "When you're the orc on the site," she said carefully, "people are very respectful and very professional, and when the day is done they go to their own homes and their own tables and you go to yours, and it is very reasonable and very correct, and lonely, as it turns out. Very lonely." The fire settled. Snow rattled the window. "The town will come around," Aldrich said. She glanced at him. "I know how Keswick Ford runs," he said. "It's cautious, not cruel. It warms up slowly, but it warms up. You'll have been here through a whole hard winter by the time the work starts in spring, and that matters to people. They count the winters you've sat through with them." She looked at him in a way he couldn't quite name, thoughtful, taking the measure of something. "Has anyone told you that?" she asked. "What?" "That you're kind." He was not sure what to do with that. He looked at his mug. "I just know the town," he said. She smiled then fully, not the almost smile. He had not seen it before, and it was a good one, warm and a little lopsided, like a thing she didn't always let out. "You know the town," she said. "All right." He went back down to his own room when the kettle was empty, and he sat in his reading chair and did not read. He looked at the ceiling. He listened to her moving, slow and unhurried, getting ready to sleep. He heard the lamp go out. He lit his own lantern, took up his coat, dry now enough, went out on the watch. The bell rang once on the hour, and its echo came back from the ridge a full second later, clean and cold and faithful, like an answer. He thought about what she had said. "Why do you live alone?" He thought about the question all through the watch, the south tower, the east lane, the square, the mill, the gate, back around, and by the time he came home at sunrise, he thought he had something like an answer. Not that she had asked again, but he thought he understood now what the question had been reaching for, which was the same thing the food on the windowsill had been reaching for, and the note, and the open door. She was asking if there was room. He put the pot on. He made the porridge himself, enough for 2, and put the second portion in the clay pot and carried it upstairs, and left it outside her door. He went back down and ate his own breakfast and went to sleep. When he woke in the afternoon, there was a note under his door. Same drafting paper, same compact handwriting. "That is the best porridge I have ever had. I did not know you could cook." He wrote back on the other side. I have been watching your methods for months." He slid it back under his own door into the hall. In the morning it was gone. December ran through its cold middle weeks, and Aldrich began to think of the upper room not as upstairs, but as part of the pattern of his days. The way the lamp went out at the same time each night, the way the sound of work stopped when the light was gone and started again not long after dawn. He learned her schedule the way he had learned the town, by paying attention over time, without meaning to, until it was simply there. She came to 2 of the watch handoffs that month, the brief morning crossovers when the day guard and the night watch met at the gate to exchange the log. She was on her way to the site both times, canvas satchel over one shoulder, and she stopped to say a word to Tobias, who said a word back, and Aldrich watched Tobias treat her the way Tobias treated everyone directly, without spectacle, and was glad of it. "She's good people," Tobias said after the second time. "I know," Aldrich said. Tobias looked at him the way he sometimes looked at him. "I assume you've told her that." "I've implied it." Tobias made a sound. "I said the town would warm up to her." "Aldrich, I meant it." Tobias pulled his coat tighter against the morning cold and looked up at the ridge. "That's not what I meant," he said. "I meant you. Have you told her what you think of her, yourself?" Aldrich watched the lane. "She knows I think her porridge is very good." The silence from Tobias lasted long enough to be eloquent. The building committee met on the last Thursday of every month in the low hall behind the constable's office. Aldrich had been on the committee for 6 years, first as the watchkeeper's representative, then as foreman after old Merrick retired. He did not love the meetings, they ran long, and the committee was careful to the point of slowness, but he was good at the work, reading plans, checking figures, keeping the agenda moving forward. He had hired the mason himself, technically. He had reviewed her guild recommendation, approved her bid, sent the counteroffer, received the signed contract. He had not met her. The committee secretary had handled the correspondence. Her signature on the contract said M. Stonehenge in the same compact hand she used for notes on drafting paper. He had not connected it until this moment. He was sitting at the head of the table when she walked in. She had the drawings under one arm and the site log in her hand, and she was wearing her good canvas shirt instead of the worn work one, and she stopped in the doorway when she saw him. He stood up. The rest of the committee looked at them, looking at each other. "You're the foreman," she said. "You're M. Stonehenge," he said. "Mora," she said. "Aldrich," he said. "I mean you know my name." "I know your name," she agreed. There was a very short silence that felt much longer than it was, and then Harwick from the council side said, Shall we begin?" And the meeting began. She presented the site log and the revised plans and the timeline for the foundation work, and she answered every question with precision and with patience. And the committee had a great many questions because the committee always did, and Aldrich watched her handle every one of them and felt something that he was fairly sure was pride, which was a new feeling to have about another person's competence, and he was not entirely sure what to do with it. The committee voted to approve the revised foundation plan, 7-0. She thanked them, closed her site log, and began rolling the drawings. The rest of the committee dispersed. He stayed. "You hired me," she said, rolling the last drawing, "on the guild's recommendation. I didn't know the correspondence went through the secretary. I saw your work summary and your bid and I approved both. I had no idea who." He stopped. He thought about it. "You must have known," he said. "The contract has my name on it." She looked at him. The room was empty now. The fire in the corner had burned down to coals. "The committee foreman is listed as A. Bren," she said. "I thought Bren was a common enough name. I didn't know until I moved in and saw the posting on the door." "The watchkeeper posting?" "Yes, and then I thought it seemed too unlikely." "When did you know for certain?" She was quiet a moment. "When I saw the handwriting on the coin you left the second morning," she said. You'd written a small note on a scrap. I didn't read it on purpose. The paper was just there. Your letters are very particular. He thought about this. He thought about all the months of food on the windowsill and coins returned, and notes slipped under doors and late evenings with the kettle, and about the moment in the stairwell on day 3 when she had looked at him without flinching and said good name for it. And he thought about how she had watched his window because his window was in the lane. And he thought about the question she had asked him in the storm. Why do you live alone? He thought she had been asking something else. He thought she had been asking for some time. You could have said something, he said, and he meant it gently. So could you, she said, and she meant it the same way. It was not an accusation. It was just the truth of it, laid out plain between them. Two careful people who had found 100 small ways to be near each other without ever naming the fact of it. He picked up his hat from the table. There is a light in your window every night, he said. I've been watching it all winter too. She stilled, just slightly, just for a moment. Then she picked up her canvas satchel. My lantern, she said. I work late. I know. He turned his hat in his hands. I come home from the watch just before dawn. Your light is always the last one on in the whole lane. I don't think I realized until just now that I've been looking for it every morning. She looked at him, steady as she always was, but there was something in it, some careful thing she was letting him see. Every morning, she said. Every morning, he said, and when it was out I knew you were resting, and I was glad of it, that you were resting. He stopped. He was better with silences than with words, and he was pushing past the place where silence was an option. I am glad, he said slower, every morning, that you're there. The fire popped once in the corner. She set her satchel down on the table. The door on my room is stuck in the cold, she said. It needs the latch lifted and the shoulder put in. He looked at her. I can show you, she said, if you've forgotten where the stair is. He had not forgotten where the stair was. He had known where it was, and where the second chair was, and where her lamp burned late, and where the food came from each morning for a very long time. He had just needed someone to open the door. The winter of Keswick 4 did not end all at once. It pulled back by degrees, a warmer week, then another frost, then the first green showing at the edge of the mill lane, then a frost again, as though the season were checking one last time to see if it was really allowed to leave. The town emerged slowly, the way towns do, blinking into the longer light and taking stock of what the cold had cost and what it had kept safe. Mora's crew broke ground on the town hall foundation in the first week of the thaw. Aldrich walked the site with her on the second morning, not in his official capacity. There was a formal inspection scheduled for later, with the full committee, but just to see. The foundation outline was marked in the soft earth, and her 4 crew members were already at work on the first corner trench, and she moved through the site the way she moved through her room, with absolute certainty, knowing where everything was and why. She showed him the corner stone. It was a piece of limestone the size of a good chest, pale gray with a blue-white grain in it, and she had it set aside under canvas at the site's edge. She pulled back the canvas for him. This goes in first, she said. Everything else is measured from here. If this one is wrong, everything is wrong. He crouched down. The stone was beautiful, not showy, but precise, the flat faces cut to tolerances he could barely see. He ran his hand along the edge. How long did it take to dress this? 3 days for me. One of my crew could have done it in 4. That's fast. She smiled, the lopsided one. The guild didn't send a slow mason. He stood up. The morning was cool and clear, and the ridge above town had lost most of its snow. He looked at the building outline in the earth, the wider door she had redesigned, the larger chamber, the proportions she had thought through before anyone else caught up to them, and he felt again that thing he had felt in the committee room, which was pride, but also something else now. Something that had been building through a whole winter of small gestures and late evenings and notes on drafting paper, and which felt, now that he was willing to name it, very much like home. "The mayor came to me," Maura said beside him. He looked at her. "When?" "Yesterday afternoon at the site. He introduced himself and shook my hand and said the committee was very pleased and that the town was glad to have a mason of my standing working here. He stayed for 20 minutes. Aldrich thought about the mayor. He was a fussy man in some ways, but not an unkind one, and Aldrich had mentioned Maura's work to him twice in recent weeks, once at the constable's office and once at the quarterly planning meeting, in the matter-of-fact way of someone noting a fact. He had not thought of it as doing anything in particular. "That's the beginning," Aldrich said. "Give it 3 months. By the time the walls are up, half the town will have found an excuse to walk by the site." She looked at him sidelong. "Is this more of your intimate knowledge of Keswick Ford?" "It is," he said. She pulled the canvas back over the corner stone and tucked it carefully against the wind. "Then I suppose I had better make sure the walls are worth looking at." He helped her with the canvas. There was an evening in the 4th week of the thaw when the light lasted long enough to eat supper outdoors for the first time. Maura brought the pot and the bowls out to the narrow stone ledge at the back of the boarding house, the one that caught the last of the western sun and looked out over the root garden and the mill lane and the edge of the ridge. It was the first outdoor meal of the year, and the air still had a bite in it, but neither of them minded. The town bell rang the early evening hour. Aldrich listened to it cross the valley. "You don't ring that one," she said. "The South Tower. No, that's Henwick. He does the day bells. I have the night ones." She looked at the ridge. The sun was going behind it. "What do you think about," she said, "on the watch? All those hours in the dark?" He thought about how to answer that honestly. "The town," he said, "where everything is, who's probably awake and who isn't, whether the East Gate's loose pin needs attention again." He paused. "This winter I thought about other things, the ceiling, whether the food would be there in the morning." She was quiet. "Whether the light in your window was still on," he said. The sun went behind the ridge. The air turned the particular cool blue of early evening in the valley, and the first lanterns came on in the lane below them, one by one, the way they always did, and Maura watched them with her bowl in her hands, and Aldrich watched her. "I'm going to be here through the summer," she said. "The build will take at least until autumn. Possibly through the first frosts." "I know," he said. "And after that," she stopped. "I don't know after that. There's always another contract somewhere." "There usually is," he agreed. She turned to look at him. The first evening star was out over the ridge. He could see it above her shoulder, very small and steady. "I'm not good at staying anywhere," she said. It was said plainly, without apology, just the truth. "I've been moving from commission to commission for 12 years. I don't have a permanent address. I have a guild registration and a post box." "That's a long time to be moving," he said. "Yes," she looked at her bowl. "I used to think it was just the nature of the work. But this winter I have thought that perhaps the nature of the work is partly an excuse." She said it slowly, finding the words. "It is easier to move than to stay and find out whether a place will keep you." He knew something about that. He thought of the way the boarding house had become a shape around his life. Not a home, exactly, just a pattern. Safe because nothing in it could leave. Safe because nothing in it was particularly there. "Staying is a risk," he said. "Yes. So is not staying." She looked at him. He turned his bowl in his hands. "I have lived in that room for 11 years," he said, "and this is the first winter I have not wanted it to end." He looked at the lane below them, the lights coming on. "That is a new thing for me. I don't know quite what to do with it, but I thought you should know." The evening held. A cart moved through the lane below, wheels quiet on the thawed mud. Somewhere across the town the night bell rang, not his, the North Tower one, which had a slightly flatter note than his own, and its echo came back off the ridge, soft and exact. She set her bowl down on the ledge. She looked at the ridge and then at him. "I have been thinking," she said, "that the corner stone sets everything. You get that one right and everything else can be corrected. You get it wrong and it doesn't matter how good the rest is." She paused. "I have been very careful my whole working life about which projects I take, about which ground I break first." She looked at him steadily. "I am not always as careful about other things." "No," he said, "neither am I." A small silence. "What if I stayed?" she said. "After the build, what if there was a reason to stay?" He did not answer right away. He was an honest man, and the answer was a large one, and he wanted to get it right. "I think," he said, "that I have been leaving you porridge in the morning for 3 weeks now, and you have not stopped leaving the pot out." She considered this. "That is true," she said. "And I think," he said, "that the second chair in your room was there before I started coming upstairs. You didn't buy it after." "I bought it the week I moved in," she said. "I thought, eventually, someone would sit in it." "Someone did," he said. She looked at him, and the lopsided smile came and stayed, and there was nothing guarded in it this time at all. The evening star held steady over the ridge. The lanterns in the lane below burned one by one, warm points in the blue dusk, and in the boarding house on Candle Row the light in the upper window and the light in the lower window made 2 small squares of amber in the stone face of the building, and anyone passing in the lane would have seen them both, close together, and thought nothing of it, 2 windows lit in the same house, the way windows are. But that evening there was supper on the stone ledge, and 2 bowls, and 2 people watching the ridge go dark, and neither of them in any hurry. Spring came to Keswick Ford the way it always did, unevenly, grudgingly, and then all at once. The mill lane turned green overnight. The root garden behind the boarding house put out shoots that the landlord's wife tended every morning in her old straw hat, and Mora learned her name, Hedda, and they fell into the habit of exchanging a word or two when Mora passed through on her way to the site. And Hedda was the kind of woman who decided quickly and without fanfare, and she had decided about Mora in the first week of March. Tobias stopped Aldrich at the gate one morning in April to tell him that his judgment, historically, had been reliable, and that in the current matter it remained so. Aldrich thanked him. "I wasn't complimenting you specifically," Tobias said. "I'm just noting the observable facts." "The observable facts are good," Aldrich agreed. Tobias looked at the ridge. "She told Henwick, the Daybell man, that the valley's limestone has better grain than she expected. He told his wife. His wife told the butcher. The butcher mentioned it to the mayor's secretary. Now the whole town knows she approves of the local stone, and half of them are walking by the site every morning. I told her that would happen." "You told her a lot of things," Tobias said. He was smiling. It was a small smile, the Tobias kind, but it was there. "Good things, it turns out." The foundation went in through April, and the walls began to rise in May, and the town did exactly what Aldrich had said it would do. They came by the site 1 or 2 at a time, first on errands that happened to pass that way, then just to look. Mora answered their questions when they had them, and they always had them, Keswick Ford being a town that took an interest in the specifics of things, and she showed them the corner stone when they asked about it, and explained the grain in the limestone, and let the ones who wanted to touch the fresh mortar do so, and never made anyone feel like an inconvenience. One of her crew, a young local man named Daves who had learned more about stonework in 3 months than in the previous 6 years of his life, told anyone who would listen that she was the best mason he had ever watched work, which at 22 was not a large sample but was sincerely meant. It got around. The mayor commissioned a second project in June, a retaining wall along the river embankment that had needed doing for 20 years. He brought it to Mora directly, without going through the committee. He brought it to her at the boarding house, which meant he knocked on the front door and asked the landlord, who told him 2nd floor, and he went up, and Mora opened the door, and the mayor explained the project, and Mora said she would look at the site and give him a timeline. She told Aldrich about it that evening over supper, in her room, which was where they ate most evenings now, the two chairs at the drafting table pushed closer to the hearth. "He came here," Aldrich said. "He did. He didn't go through the committee. He said he didn't want to wait for the monthly meeting." She passed him the bread. "I told him I was contracted through the hall build, but that I could overlap the survey work." He seemed satisfied. Aldrich broke the bread. He was thinking. "That's how it works," he said. "The mayor going directly. That means it's not just the committee anymore, it's the town." "Yes," she said. She was watching him. Does that sit well with you?" She thought about it with the care she brought to things. "It sits well," she said. "I wasn't sure it would, but it does." She looked at the drawing on the table, the town hall elevation. The walls were real now, not plans, and she had taken to revising the drawing as the build progressed, adding notes in the margin as things resolved. "I think I had forgotten," she said, "what it is like to be in a place long enough that people learn to find you." He knew what she meant. He had lived in Keswick Ford for 20 years and had been found by very few people. He was aware that the winter had changed the number. "They'll find you here as long as you're here to find," he said. She looked at him, and then she said quietly, "I've been thinking about registration." He looked up. "The Masons Guild keeps a regional registry," she said. "Working stonemasons who have a primary address in the valley. The valley rate is lower, there are more regional contracts, and you get first refusal on council work within a day's ride." She was looking at the drawing as she said this, her finger tracing the north elevation. "I have been looking at the form." He did not say anything for a moment. He made sure he understood what he was hearing. "How long does a regional registration last?" he said. 5 years, renewable. "And you'd need an address." "A permanent one or close enough." She looked at him then. "The boarding house doesn't count, it's a let." "No," he said, "it doesn't." He thought of the root garden behind the building. The one Hedda tended every morning in her straw hat. The one with the south-facing wall that caught the good light. The one the landlord had been meaning to build over for a decade, but never quite gotten round to, because the planning committee had not approved the plans. And the planning committee was slow, and the foreman had perhaps not prioritized that particular application. "There's a plot of land," he said. She waited. "On the south side of the mill lane. Not large, good limestone base, solid ground, south aspect." He paused. "It's been available for some time. The previous interest fell through." "Who holds it?" "The estate. I'm on the allocation committee." He looked at her. "I want to be clear that this is not me pulling strings. The plot has been available to any qualifying applicant for 4 years, and no one has put in a proper submission. A regional Mason's registration would be a qualifying interest." She was looking at him steadily. "I want to be clear about something else too," he said. I am not trying to arrange your life. You are very capable of arranging your own life, and you have done it across a dozen cities, and I have not. What I mean is," he stopped. He found the words. "I would like you to stay. That's the plain thing. The plot of land is real and the registration is a practical matter and you can weigh them yourself. But the reason I am telling you about them is that I would like you to stay." The fire was low. The lamp on the drafting table made a warm circle over the drawings. Maura set down her bread. She reached into her tool roll, the leather one on the table, the one with the marking pins, and took out a folded paper. She unfolded it and laid it flat beside the drawings. It was the guild registration form, filled out in her compact, unhurried hand. The address line had a dash where the address should go. "I filled it out 6 weeks ago," she said. He looked at the form, he looked at the dash. "I was waiting," she said, "to be sure." "Are you sure?" She looked at him with the steady look, the one that had been on the stair that first day, the one that did not flinch, the one that gave him exactly as much as it intended to give and was not performing anything. Yes, she said. He put his hand on the table, not on her hand, near it, close, the way you put a thing down near another thing that matters to you. She turned her hand over, her calloused, careful, stone-certain hand. They sat like that for a while, with the fire low and the lamp warm and the town outside quiet under the spring sky, and the two windows of the boarding house on Candle Row lit together, the way they had been all winter. The registration went through in the first week of July. The plot of land was approved by the allocation committee in the same week, which was slightly faster than the usual timeline. And if anyone on the committee noticed that the foreman had reviewed that application twice as carefully as any other that quarter and expedited every step, they did not say so in the meeting, because the committee was thorough in many ways, and they knew good work when they saw it. By autumn, the town hall walls were to the second story, and the whole town had an opinion on the lintel stone Mora had chosen for the main arch. It was the blue-white limestone with the particular grain, a piece she had sourced from a quarry 2 days north, and when it went in there was a small crowd in the lane watching, which had never happened before at a building site in Keswick Ford, and Aldrich was there with Tobias and Hedda and Daves and the mayor and approximately 40 other people. All of them looking up at the arch and saying things like asterisk yes. That's the one asterisk, and you see how it catches the light, and I said from the beginning she knew what she was doing. Mora set the lintel herself. She did not rush it. When it was in, she stepped back and looked at it for a long moment. The crowd was quiet. Then she nodded once to herself, the way she always did when a thing was where it was supposed to be. She turned around, and Aldrich was there. "Well," he said. She looked at the arch, then at him. "The door is wide enough," she said. He laughed. It was not a small one this time. He walked her back from the site that evening as the light was going, the two of them through the mill lane and up Candle Row, past the root garden where Hedda's summer herbs were still holding on in the mild autumn air, and up the stairs of the boarding house to the landing they had stood on all those months ago with 11 words between them and a bundle of candles. The landing was not wider than it had been, but they had learned to stand in it better. She put the kettle on. He carried in the wood from the hall. Outside, the town settled into the early evening quiet that he knew in his bones, the shift of light, the last carts in the lane, the smell of supper fires, the long exhalation of a day done. He had walked this town every night for 20 years, and he knew the sound of it better than anything, and tonight it sounded different from how it had before, which was not because the town had changed, but because he had, and he understood the difference now. The lantern on her drafting table went on. He lit his own on the windowsill, the one the whole lane could see. They sat at the table. The kettle boiled. The town bell rang the hour, and its echo came back off the ridge, clean and exact. 2 careful people, a long winter. 1 decent man, 1 lamp in the dark, and the patient, certain knowledge that if you keep the light on, sooner or later someone will find their way to it. Outside on Candle Row, the 2 windows lit together, the way they always did now, warm and close and steady, and anyone passing in the lane would have looked up at them and felt, without quite knowing why, that everything was as it should be.